We want to, most of all, know what the real situation and the condition of the economy is. If it is as disastrous as some reports seem to suggest, what can be done?
To visualize it, one of them is the shipbuilding industry, specifically 𝗵𝗺𝗹𝗺 in Papenburg. Here we see a cruiser here, and is an employer of about 20 to 50,000 people, directly and indirectly. Shipyard, that's a very sensitive, but I'm sure this shipyard, like the automotive industry, that these gears have been interfered with by the corona crisis. For instance, the price of steel has risen incredibly. You can still be happy if you can get it. The shipyard has always delivered on time, as far as I know. Now, that's the other extreme. Supplies computer chips and 3 units, like with the shipyard earlier. I know firsthand that in maintenance in different industries there is a grave shortage of spare parts. That's that's the core of what I want to say here. Production is only possible if the 4 M's are simultaneously met. Material, steel for the shipbuilding industry, or for the automotive industry, which is certainly our biggest industry, who are also experiencing problems. Audi has just declared short-time labor. The machines must be in place. The method must work. That is the smallest problem right now, I think. And, of course, you need the manpower, i.e. the people who work there. And you wouldn't believe how often it is the case that one of these 4 M's fails, not least due to the vaccinations, which take out a lot of people for a while. In my home county, the school had to close. Why? Because the teachers were all vaccinated at the same time. We know that the computer chip industry also is experiencing, it's not 5 to 12, it's 5 past 12 by now, and we have to take action to avoid the worst consequences. We also have to think about what we can do to prevent. This is a chip factory in Dresden by Infineon Company, the largest chip manufacturer in Germany. One of the largest, if not the largest supplier to the automotive industry. It's a large company with 4,000 or 5,000 employees, and we can see it again. It's a complex interplay of different parts of this factory, of many people and of many suppliers. I used to work for this company in the past. That used to be a problem. And in this clean room, just to illustrate it, and that has to do with the sense or nonsense of masks, people are wrapped into a full-body condom, as it were, particularly with a mouth and nose cover made of the best material technically available. Nevertheless, all these people are particle sources, really particle sources, because this fabric is not capable of retaining all particles. And if as an engineer, and I did that for many years myself, if I handle these ultra-sensitive, I must not speak, because speaking, particles and bacteria will pass through this fabric. Bacteria 5 to 10 micrometers large, viruses are 100 times smaller. So I don't need to talk about how useful these masks are in order to protect ourselves and our environment from such particles. And if somebody has no symptoms, then there is no risk, I would say, as a layperson. Now, the next slide, please. If there is an interruption here, the entire process is severely interfered with. That may be only 1%, even 5% of the entire process, and they will impede or stop the whole process. So the entire value creation chain, and that leads to bottlenecks. What you get out of a factory is not determined by the entire capacity of the value creation chain, but by the bottleneck. Right now, we have a globally networked value creation chain that is very sensitive to such bottlenecks. It starts with transport, currently in China, in 2 container ports, which are basically closed down due to the infections. If the capacity utilization crosses a threshold of just over 80%, represented by the red line here, you get these bottlenecks. What we have right now should look much worse than it looks here, but we only have an impact on Germany, and the mid-term objective would be to supplement at least these global sources by local or regional sources. It was reduced, and then you have the situation under control again. That is, of course, by looking after the staff, by getting alternative materials, alternative sources. To get a grip on the situation, which has not yet peaked as far as I can see, we have to take immediate action to try to stop this downward trend, or upward trends in terms of the time it takes to make products, and we have to, in the mid and long term, and that's what I would suggest, we have to make sure in the mid and long term that our supply chains, our economic chains are made more robust for these things, regionalized in other words. That is one of the reasons why we should have in the companies, the way you deal with your staff can also make a contribution to solving our problems. And there are companies where 70% of the staff are so frustrated that they really work against their own company. And what is the reason for that? A colleague from my former university, 𝗖𝗀𝗀𝗃𝗃 University, looked at this in detail. It's down to 3 aspects. First of all, the question, am I self-determined in what I do? Can I determine how I do what I need to do? Am I free in designing the way I do my work? Or am I in a culture where I simply have to execute orders? Well, second aspect, respect for your performance. And third aspect, further training and further development options. Fourth aspect, I'm always kept in the loop on what my organization, my company, my authority, wherever I work, how they are doing. And if you get these 4 aspects right, then you have committed staff members, and that will also lead to a society, as it has been said before. Most people spend most of their waking hours in the job, not at home. And that's a huge societal task for companies, but also public authorities. The chips go to where demand is and where the big customers are. So the best customers get the products first, and the automotive industry and maybe others who are secondary customers need to wait a bit. That's the way it is. But with the raw materials, there's certainly a shortage of wood, as you probably heard, of steel and other very fundamental materials, and then spare parts, particularly if these spare parts include electronic components.
What did the lack of chips arrive from? Is that more computers that are being bought?
Yes, that's my take on it.
Well, if we stop the testing, or as we have stopped the testing by now, Probably subsidies will be freed in order to balance off productions breaking down. Maybe that would be a sensible application of the money.
For our government to do something similar, it doesn't have to be subsidies. I think even reasonable credit lines would be a solution, and fast licensing.
We are having a generation that has not had school for 1.5 years, which was not at a very high level before. So in education, we have to make sure that we get better quality. What is your take?
Absolutely. I agree 150%. I'd like to quote Saint-Exupéry. He said, if you want people to go to sea, then teach them the longing for faraway countries. Don't give them the tools and the trees, just do that. So the task of the schools would be to foster an attitude, become interested in this, but also at the same time to educate them into becoming citizens.
So we have to have more expertise in the hands of the people, right?
Hands-on. In retrospective, I didn't see it like that back then. It's the practical studies, so that somebody who doesn't go to university or college can still attend a professional academy after finishing school. And many of them, and how well trained they are, many of them replace an engineer.
Did your economic situation get worse or better? 42 say no, the rest says yes. The expectation, do you expect your economic situation to worsen? 79% say yes, and only 21% say no. Running out of wood, we help to keep wood, the craftsmanship alive, stop selling timber to China. Here, so we do see things are taking a course, and some parts of the populations have clearly noted that we see there's action to be taken.
12:05.
But the absences of the vaccination is not subsidized. So if a teacher is sick, the state will pay. That has a macroeconomic effect, but many companies have a problem because many people are away for longer time.
It highlights another weakness of the previous government, because now we were at least fast enough to suspend all of this with a moratorium for 2 months now, but it shows the contradictions within this policy, which used to be so industrially oriented, so much oriented towards big business. We've seen horror reports again and again concerning the supply bottlenecks, such as the closure report in China, where one positive test was found. The whole thing looks like politically controlled. But what is the situation really? I mean, maybe for the economy, for the world economy?
Not a very simple question and situation. According to my opinion, the official forecasts of the economic situation, which are positive, contrast to the background developments that we've seen over the past 18 months. Ramped up, there's many zombie companies, so-called companies, zombie companies that are still around, that have been covered by due to the low interest policy, which would not be able to pay off their debts if we had normal interest rates. So where is the economy? Where are we going? Extremely difficult to answer, because we are in uncharted territory. We are in a situation that we've never been in before. Money was printed to an extent that we have never seen in Europe or the Anglo-Saxon. Debts are higher than ever, measured in compared to the economic power, and even the last years since the financial crisis cannot be carried on. There has to be some kind of debt cap that is going to be painful. Many companies will have to leave the markets. I only know from the investment banker's point of view that debt at that extent is unbearable. I either expect a controlled inflation, hopefully controlled, to get the inflation down, get the debts down. I don't know if that's going to work. If that doesn't, we can't say what's going to be coming, when it will, but it is going to come.
I remember right, the small and medium-sized enterprise, i.e. entrepreneurship has been the backbone of the German economy, with 70 to 75% of jobs. What's happening here? What conditions?
We've seen a big gap. The large corporations have massively won over the developments of the last 18 months. The textbook example is Amazon. The local retail is strongly reduced, closing shops, and Amazon wins. But that doesn't only apply there, it applies for many industries. Hotels, small hotels close, big chains win, and that applies throughout the bench. And these lockdowns can be seen as a gigantic fishing trawl. The stronger the lockdowns, the harder the lockdowns, the more will be, the small companies will close and the biggest can win. More ones are leaving the market, and that plays for the big ones, and there is a strong interest of high finance to work in this direction, that they get rid of the small competitions.
Do we have to expect this to be part of the Great Reset program, i.e. this being targeted activities that are geared towards shifting the assets of small and medium-sized companies and of private individuals?
I can't say, but as a former investment banker, I can only say there's massive incentives to foster these developments. Treasuries grow. And how far this is deliberate and planned, I can't say. And one of the biggest players are, of course, the media, because they are either state media, not very critical of what the governments do, or the private media are in the hands of billionaires, and there is a great interest for them to foster these concentration processes, because they also win if the lockdowns take long, if the small and medium-sized companies leave the market. So how do you support a certain situation, Corona, objectively, or how traumatizing, calming down the reader? There's a clear interest in trying to produce as much fear as possible and strict as possible, and a political measure would be, first of all, to balance off these concentration processes by creating counterweights in the mediascape, and of course by supporting small and medium-sized companies and restricting the big companies. They are partly not even subject to tax.
What options are there for the government to take action here?
Well, there's a whole range of action that could be taken to limit the power of corporates. There could be taxation or other things get taxation on estate, on real estate. So there could be good incentives to really get the big winners, and this is a process that started since the first financial crisis, 2007, that the big fortunes are addressed, and instead the normal people who work in the medium level of the economy are helped, and on the other hand, that small income is freed freed of tax. That would help normal employees and medium-sized self-employed companies would have opportunities to be supported in order to help people who do not earn much money, and on the contrary, the large assets, especially the large incomes, could be tapped into. But of course, you have to make sure that we don't drive industry away from our country. So if the taxation is too high on the industry, they would simply move away to other countries. But one could start with from real estate. That's 400 billion per year, and that is ground rent, and like all other asset classes, it's very concentrated. So the first thing is we should have a good and substantial ground rent. Could be increased by a tax on ground estate not used themselves, and we could generate a lot of money from this, and that would be most fair, because ground rent is the most unjust way of income, because I don't have to do anything. This would help small employees or even the medium-sized company. It would be very easy because the ground can go elsewhere. For example, agricultural ground used in Germany is owned by people who are not in agriculture. The Aldi brothers, for example, are big investors in agricultural land. So that means over 60% of the German farmers have to pay a rent to somebody who is not farming and who owns the land. It applies to rental flats as well. So that is a high concentration of a very few, very potent investors.
Do we need to make an attempt to coordinate this internationally? Our fundamental idea would be to go back to our sovereignty, to the basis, back to the regions. If we do this, should we then also establish a network together with the international community to establish a new lockstep, for instance, with our European neighbors, but also in the other countries of the world, such as the US, to get similar thoughts going?
That would be, of course, the best thing to do, an international coordination, but I think that is extremely unlikely and extremely difficult. I think every reform will start locally. As you say quite rightly, regional principles is very important. I think that we start to reform bottom up. And if we start with small examples, and this can be the 𝗓𝗃𝗃, it works in Germany. The 𝗓𝗃𝗃, Italy has the 𝗲𝗃 with over 10,000 companies. There are working local, regional conglomerates, and from other regions we need a nucleus that we start with, saying that works. We have a network here, we have alternative currencies, we have economic processes that cover this financial network, and then the hope is that this will take an international floor, that the idea takes its place when it was in 𝗏𝗏𝗏 in 1923, which was picked up by the Anglo-Saxon press as an example. Could one structure it saying, first of all, back to regionality? That's the source of democracy, the power from the people. And then where we have the big imbalances, which we can clearly see now, better than ever before, we call upon taxation for control, and where we say it's not just immoral but juridically questionable, we get back what has been robbed from us in the end by somehow fraudulent groups of companies or people. For me, that seems to be a three-step approach that would lead us to where we need to go if we see all the misleading situations we are in.
Absolutely, I fully agree to use all levels that you can employ regional initiatives for everything that works today. If, as a grassroots party, as the Basis, we could install the government, then we could, of course, do a lot of things to reverse these horrible trends that we've seen over the last 12, 18 months. And it would be easy to do that from the federal level if there is a political will to counteract these trends. And of course you can do something such that we don't damage our industry. I'm a businessman, I am a banker, so we must not overtax our industry, our manufacturing industries, supported by international corporations who don't pay taxes, so we could try to tax them internationally. It's not possible at the national level. All the Amazon sales in Germany are taxed with some sales tax, but there's no serious tax that Amazon pays here or elsewhere. So if we had good governance and good will that we have in promoting the common good, not the good of a small minority, then numerous measures, like you mentioned them, would be possible. If orchestrated at these three levels, we could do everything at the same time. This can be the only choice. It's really strange and difficult to understand that politics run directly counter to this. This is really counter to the Chancellor's oath of office to act in to the benefit of the country.
Well, the finding that we have found in the last 4 days is that it was exactly against the well-being of the people, in favor of big supranational entities.
If we allowed people to vote on these, then we'd find that 95% of people would be in favor. That's my conviction, because these taxes on large assets, wealthy, super wealthy people, that would only affect 1.5% of the people, but all these payment flows that happen under the lid are not publicized by the media for the richest families, for a few rich families, and we've seen this for decades. It's the policy for a clientele, not for the people. And if that was publicized, widely publicized, then there would be an outcry in our country, and people would see how unfair it is. But this is not publicized by the media, because they're owned by billionaires themselves or by the state. So in order to get the support of large majorities, we would also ensure objective information, which we don't have basically anymore. We believe that private capital and profit maximization will ensure free media. That's a misconception. That's not true. Capital, money, profits must never be commingled with information. The media need to be free. We have like 8 or 10 families in Germany that own all the media, and it was said 30 to 40 years ago that freedom of opinion in Germany means that 30 or 40 families can say what they want. Now it's only 8 or 10 families that are left. If you're dependent on income from advertising, then you can never speak out against large companies, large corporations. So that we need a fund of 5 or 10 billion euro a year that will appoint free journalists appointed by a cultural council that is actually composed of independent people, that would gradually eat into the power of the big media companies.
So I just want to add that we have the government-state contract for radio and media, and that means minority opinions have to be reported, and this is something that is not the case in the past 18 months, that people like Dr. Wodarg, who in March had a little appearance at Frontal 21, and then was cut out.
Maybe we were of the opinion that GEZ, or the successor organization that collects money for financing of the public media groups, that this should be used for independent journalism, because everybody must have noticed that this is what we have are state media that are used in a similar way as they were in totalitarian regimes.
We asked them, should everybody decide themselves what media gets their GEZ, their contribution, and we have 79%, 97% saying yes. So currently that split does not seem to be satisfactory.
And to German TV in the past, there was much more quality in Germany. But the idea isn't wrong, but it is abused by state power anymore, so there is no real pluralism anymore. And the leaders of these stations are appointed by a cultural council, not by political parties. That this media is not independent, but that they have become pure state media, something that we know from North Korea. But this is the same thing here now, and this is why this is our core point of discussion. That's why it's so important, and we have to intervene here, and we will.
A last point, the Springer Imperium, the KK is belonging to KKR at the Wall Street. So this is one of the most important opinion-shaping journalist imperiums in Germany, is in the hands of Wall Street investors. Just imagine what that means.
Information, then we can't expect them to take the right decision. So it's important to make all of this public as soon as possible, all the things we've found out here now. And then I believe that, as you said, Mr. Kreis, that 95% of the population would immediately recognize that what we have seen here is not only misguidance, but it's also inhumane and destructive, that we have to counteract it as soon as possible. I used to be a banker myself, and back then I was surprised, 11 years ago, during the financial and economic crisis, how it's possible that all responsibilities are brushed away by printing money at breakneck pace. But this printing of money, additional assets have been shifted from the bottom to the top. That's my impression. Is that correct?
That's difficult to say. Could have been enforced by this, because the low interest rates have increased the stock markets, the land values, so that newcomers it's made more difficult to get a part of the pie. So from this low interest rate policy, we have concentrated more fortune, because younger families have to pay so high amounts that they can't participate in that game. Yes.
So again, should those responsible for the lockdown crisis be held liable? 89%, yes. Then 58%. Did you find that certain products were no longer available due to the crisis? That's 58% who say that. Then 79% expect their economic situation will deteriorate over the next 6 months. That's of course not a representative survey, but only a survey of those who were willing to participate. And here we have a large problem that many worry about. Do you fear that Germany might become a Orwellian state? 95%, and many are also very skeptical that the economy can pick up after the crisis. Then we saw that earlier, 97% are in favor of...
Well, I think we discussed this, and I think the most important point is to create an awareness of the problem here, and this is why some people, according to the surveys here, are of the idea that things will turn well again. It won't if we don't all get up together now. Checks are going to be asked for, and if you get up now and become active, and even just by getting up to the election and elect the party that is against this, the Basis, they can make a change. If you stay in your seat, you may probably be eroded over by the development.